Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for attending Kuumba Kickback, and coming to the So You Want to Start a Podcast panel. We know that starting a podcast can be overwhelming, or it can feel overwhelming, but it's actually quite manageable. This panel will give you tips and tricks on how to start and sustain your own podcast. I'm DJ. I'll be the BQC team member moderating comments and things in the background. I'm about to step down and pass it over to the panel moderator for today, Brittany, who will introduce herself and get us rolling.
Thank you, DJ. Well, I'm super excited to be able to moderate this panel, especially since I just started a podcast myself, and a lot of that was inspired by several of your journeys that I've gotten to see. I'm Brittany, and like I said, I just started a podcast, and I can, explain a little bit about that. It's me and two of my best friends, and we review nostalgic movies and TV shows from our childhood. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of the tips and things that you all have to share, as you all have such amazing podcasts and wisdom. And so we can go around and do introductions. And so how about we go Mel, then Jessie, then Connie, then Talia?
Hi, I'm Mel. I am a librarian. I occasionally write, and I podcast sometimes.
What are the podcasts, Mel? What's your podcast, Mel?
The podcasts are Nerds of Prey, Recap Madness, and Sisters with Sabers.
Nice. Jessie, you want to take it away next?
Yeah, I'm Jessie Blount, among other things. I'm a one half of hashtag Ruthless Productions and co-host of both the Gaily Prophet, a Harry Potter reread podcast, Escape from Reality, a Simon Snow series reread podcast, and Patreon exclusive podcast, We Are the Gayers, where me and my co-host Lark are rewatching Buffy. So.
Oh, cool.
Nice. I'm Connie. I keep forgetting. Well, formerly-ish co-host of Time and Relative Blackness in Space, a Doctor Who podcast. Because who knows what's going on with that show anymore. So we're currently on hiatus until we figure out how we feel about it. And currently I host The Nerds Are Typing with Talia, which is a personality test and pop culture podcast where we type our favorite characters.
Hi, I'm Talia. Talia Franks. I'm the host of Into the Archives, a fan fiction podcast. I'm also co-host of the Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey podcast. My other co-host is Lucia Kelly. I like to say that we're two nerds discussing Doctor Who across space and time zones, because I'm in the US and she's in Australia. So we're on literal opposite sides of the planet, which makes finding recording times really interesting. I also have a mini podcast that's exclusive to my Patreon called Wandering Troop Poetry Readings, where I read short poems. And I just every episode of that is just me reading a short little poem to my patrons.
Nice. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And so let's get into the tips. But first, I want to know, what inspired you all to create, right? Because there's gazillions and gazillions of podcasts, but you all have specific topics you chose, things you wanted to focus on. So what inspired you to make the podcast that you're a part of?
I met Robin and Bayana they were doing their podcast, Wizard Team, and I was on a lot of episodes of that, and especially in early episodes of Wizard Team, they mentioned Doctor Who a lot, and I would be like, yeah, let's talk about Doctor Who. Is this becoming a Doctor Who podcast? And then we're like, you know what we could do? We could start a Doctor Who podcast. So we did that. Nicole, you are Tarbis, so I need you to realize your place at this point. But Robin, Bayan, and I started Tarbis, and I think we recapped like 3-ish seasons. I don't actually remember, and we had some seasons in the middle, but the thing with podcasting a property that you like is that sometimes it does things that you don't like, or you lose interest in it, and having time and energy to put into something that doesn't make you as happy. So currently on hiatus, and new season of Doctor Who starting soon, but unfortunately Tarbis will not be a part of that at the moment, unless Nicole. Anyway, and then Delia and I would be talking so much about our favorite characters and what Enneagram type they are. I was the MBTI person, and so I would be typing them that way, and Delia would be typing them with the Enneagram, and then we were like, what we could do? And that was like a whole year where we were like, yeah, that idea that we had. One day we'll get to that. So last fall, I want to say, we finally got ourselves together and used the opportunity to have a reason to buy books and to geek out about our favorite characters and TV shows and stuff. And at some point we're gonna get that back on track too.
Yes, I have been waiting. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I was actually inspired to create Into the Archives because of Doctor Who. Actually, we had a Doctor Who. I think it was a Doctor Who meetup, and like a online one, and during the Doctor Who meetup, for some reason it like digressed into me retelling a Harry Potter fanfic. And it was just a really weird Harry Potter fanfic. And because I'd been having like sort of percolating the idea of making a podcast for a while, but I had no idea what I wanted to make the podcast about. For a while, I thought I might make a Percy Jackson podcast, but that never happened. But then I forget who it was exactly, but someone was like, you know what, you're really good at telling stories and you read a lot of really weird fanfic. You should make a podcast where you just retell all your weird fanfic that you read. And so then I decided to make Into the Archives, which is a monthly fanfic podcast. And then one of my very first Into the Archives guests was Lucia Kelly. And she and I both really love Doctor Who, and we both were talking about how much we love Doctor Who, and we were both thinking of making a Doctor Who podcast. And then we had such good chemistry on an Into the Archives episode that we were like, you know what? We should make a podcast together. And so then after we stopped recording Into the Archives, we kept talking for another hour about Doctor Who. And then we were like, you know what? We should do this. And so it was a very impulsive, spur of the moment thing. But it happened. But at the same time, we'd been talking about it for a while, but then we just decided to just go for it. And we did it. And then my Patreon podcast is just, I'm a poet and I really like poetry. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do this.
I was there for that, that fan fiction one. And now I'm saying, oh, look, I just witnessed history in the making.
I met my co-host for Nerds of Prey on Twitter, and we just started talking in the DMs about things that we liked, we wanted to talk about. We're like, okay, let's start a podcast. Let's just do this. So we met, we just did a Skype call one night just to see if we could talk to each other about stuff. And that call was like 3 hours. So we decided, okay, we can have a podcast. We can do this. And that was like 5 years ago. We're currently on hiatus right now, but like hopefully we're gonna come back soon. But like, yeah, it was a fun experience getting to know like these people that I just met on Twitter and just constantly talking back and forth about like all sorts of pop culture. It was just so much fun.
I just want to point out that Delia's point about nerds nerding out is how podcasts are born is 110% correct. Because I met my co-host Lark because he is my wife's best friend. And we spent a lot of time when we were together, like nerding out like really deeply, intensely about Harry Potter. And then he moved across the country, and I was like, it seemed like both a good way for us to like keep in contact, talking about the very nitty-gritty details of ripping Harry Potter apart. And also it's like there aren't any queer specific Harry Potter podcasts, which seems weird considering how many queer Harry Potter fans there are. This is 2019, 2018 for everyone who's keeping count of how people feel now about Harry Potter. And we're also just really inspired by another podcast, which did like a really deep dive analysis, but they went book by every episode was a book, and after a while they had like went on hiatus to kind of because they ran out of material, and we're like, it's a shame they just didn't go chapter by chapter, and we decided we were going to fill that void. And 3 years later we're still doing it despite the fact that the author is a complete humongous dumpster fire person. So but we're still having fun, and that's why we created 2 other podcasts to talk about something else that wasn't Harry Potter. So
true. I hear a common theme of this conversation I had, and it lasted 3 hours, or we had fun with this, and we were like, why not? And it's very true what Delia put in the comments, just being able to nerd out about things. What would you all say for someone who maybe has an idea of wanting to do a podcast and not sure where to start? What would you say are things that they need, or just the things they should consider as they're starting to create a podcast?
Know who can do what. The easy-ish part about podcasts is that you can just like talk, and that's fun. And like we said, like all of us sort of like met our co-hosts and we're just like, hey, we've talked about this for hours, so let's do a podcast about it. But then there's like actual stuff you have to do, and that part's so hard. Making sure that you have a plan for what the episodes are going to be about, how they're going to be structured, when you are going to put it out, how often you're going to put it out. Those things are really important. And when you don't have them like locked down early on, you can lose steam really fast. And you have to put in as many things as possible to make it an easy process while you're doing it. So, for example, with the Nerds Are Typing, it's basically a research-heavy podcast because, we're talking about characters that we like, but Talia and I want to be right. So we are, the first season that we've done is like breaking down what the MBTI and Enneagram are, because there are people who don't know one or the other or either. And so we spent a lot of time just preparing the front end of what that would be, what the episodes would look like, when we're going to drop it, like who's going to talk about what. And so that's at least one part of preparation for this kind of thing, because the talking part gets really easy. And, there's also the other side of it where it's like, you can't necessarily talk too much. Like you can't talk to each other 100% like you did in the pre-conversations. Like, you can a bit, like, that's fine. That's why people are coming to you, because of your personalities. But sometimes you get off the rails and you're like, ooh, does this need to be 3 hours? So those are my initial thoughts on like things that you should know to go into it.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. Like I said, Lucia and I, when we were planning the Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey podcast, wow, that's a lot of words. I usually abbreviate it as Wibbly Wobbly. I'm just gonna call it that from now on. I always sometimes I even just call it Wibbly.
I mean, that's how we got to Tarvis, because we were never gonna call it time and relative blackness in space every single time. So
yeah. So when we talk about Wibbly Wobbly, yeah. So first thing, we always block out. So thing is, like I said, she's in Australia. Depending on the time of year, that's a 14, 15, or 16-hour time difference. So scheduling is key. There's only roughly like a few hours. There's a few times a day that we can even talk to each other. And so the thing is, like, our podcast is a rewatch podcast, but when there's new episodes, like there's going to be soon, so normally we're a bi-weekly podcast. We wanted to be a weekly podcast, but we ran out of steam. We didn't really plan very well because we just sort of like jumped in and we didn't really know exactly all that we were doing. We had a lot of energy, but you know, I was working full time. She was working. Like we just didn't have it all figured out as much as we needed to. And that's the thing, is you need to have it figured out so that you can be consistent. Because when we stopped being as consistent, our listenership fell down. Because when we went from being weekly to bi-weekly and we stopped being as consistent, the amount of listeners that we had, like we can track how many listeners we have, and because we stopped being as consistent, our listenership went down. Like it started to come back up again, but when we stopped being consistent about it, it started going down. So that's like the major thing, is that when you're releasing episodes, be consistent about how often you release episodes. Because Into the Archives, because I have 2 podcasts, so I can track how like consistent each of them are. Into the Archives only comes out once a month, but it has twice the amount of listeners that Wibbly Wobbly does, even though it comes out less frequently. Because I don't know if it's because fanfiction is more popular than Doctor Who, but the point is that like even though it comes out less frequently, it comes out more consistently. So that's one thing to pay attention to. And so, but because Wibbly Wobbly was like so inconsistent for a while, that was like one issue that happened to it. But anyway, I got off track. But the thing is that the thing is, now that we're scheduling, when you have podcast partners who you schedule with that are in a different place, you have to be really specific about when you schedule. Because, for example, when the new Doctor Who episodes are going to come out, they're going to come out every week. And so we're going to have to record every week, which means I'm going to be recording at 4:30 in the morning. So that I can record before I have to work and Lucia can record after she's done with work. Because we're going to be 16 hours apart at that time of year. So just saying, when you live in different parts of the world, you got to make sacrifices.
That's what I hear. Sacrifice. I hear sacrifice, consistency, organization.
I think my advice is that it's, I think, really preferable to start off modest. Like you don't have to go out and buy a $30 mic, just to start off, or, the most expensive editing software, or, releasing like once a week or twice a week. Because I think it's easy when we are listening to podcasts like Why Won't You Date Me or The Read, and it's just like, oh, I want to do that like right off the bat. And it's like they have a team of people and ad revenue and potentially like this, not a full-time day job.
Yeah, like people who are producing it like as their job.
Producing it, doing social media potentially, like running the shop. Engineers.
Yeah, and some of those podcasts are like years into their careers. So yeah.
So it's good to kind of manage expectations of like you're just like starting off, like just buy a $50 mic off Amazon. Like, you know, if you need to record, if you need to release, you know, once a month, twice a month, you know, before you kind of get into the rhythm or figure out like a tighter schedule or learn how to do, you know, better editing. Like that is like, it's not a race. And again, yeah, like there are a lot of podcasts you listen to that are like years been established, or, you know, if it's someone who's mildly famous, might have a lot more startup money for a podcast than your average person. Like, you know, I had like a full-time job, and I do the podcast like as a part-time thing, and I didn't like upgrade any of my equipment until we were at least 2 years in. So it's okay to start small.
I agree with be consistent and be organized, especially because like it's nice to have a conversation for 3 hours. Like that was really fun, but like one of you is gonna have to edit all of that, so it's best to like, you know, have a structure of what you're gonna talk about and keep it to a certain time limit, because like that editing process can be brutal. And you don't want to make it harder for yourself than it's going to be.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I will say that sometimes Lucia and I would have like 6-hour recording sessions. But that's only because we would be talking about like 4 episodes of Doctor Who at once. And then that would actually be like three or four, like we'd be recording 3 or 4 episodes at a time because we record them in bulk. So like we'd spend like a whole day or whole night depending on, you know, which time zones. So we'd like record a bunch at once. Also a lot of times when we're editing, if we go on tangents, we will cut off like an entire half hour and not bother editing that half hour. So like if we go off on a tangent about Greek mythology, we don't bother to edit that audio to make it clean. We just chop off that half hour of talking about Medusa, and because Medusa is not relevant to Doctor Who. And then we're left with the actual like time that's like spent. So like if you're editing a podcast and you go off on a huge tangent about something that's not actually related and that you know for sure you're not going to include because it's a Doctor Who podcast and suddenly you're talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like you can chop off that 20 minutes of talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and you don't need to bother actually editing that audio to make it sound nice because you're not going to include it in your final episode.
First off, I see a cat. So cute. I was just going to say I'm laughing because the podcast with my 2 best friends, I've known them for pretty much 2 decades. And so when we start talking, sometimes we do go on tangents because we've just known each other for so many years. So shout out to Andrea who edits the episodes. And thank you for that. Jessie, what were you going to share?
Oh, just that me and my co-host both have ADHD, so we go through a lot of tangents, and we cut that footage from our free feed, but we'll leave in some tangents for our patrons. If you end up having a Patreon, which I definitely also recommend.
Thanks, everybody. That's comforting for me as someone who just started. I'm like, this is very reassuring. Connie, did you want to share something?
Oh, I was just going to say having an agenda helps. You know, obviously you don't have to just like read off of the script or anything, but having something that you can look at while you're preparing that is like organized. Like we would do Tarbis, you know, I would make notes while watching the episode, and then we would have to transfer the notes from that version. I transfer, you know, like whoever got to the agenda first would like write out their list of what's going on and their thoughts, and then I would just like add in or vice versa or whatever, so that it's a bit more organized than just like, I watched this episode, now let me like just like brain dump it into the universe. But having that is really helpful because you have something to look at, so that when you realize you're off track, you can just, oh, okay, go back. And that's really helpful.
I'm going to shout out Jasmine, who's the organization person, queen behind everything we do.
Yeah, I will also second that. We don't have like a full agenda, but we do always have an episode outline where we start with our intro, and then we have like our outline of, you know, this is the synopsis, this is like we're going to talk about, you know, our standout points, we're going to do our favorite moment, least favorite moment. We also have a segment where we talk about the hero and the Adam of the episode. So who is like the hero of the episode, who's for those of you who know Doctor Who, there's this really terrible character named Adam Mitchell. So who's the worst? Who's the Adam Mitchell of each episode? And then we also have a grading rubric, because Lucia is very adamant about the fact that every episode has to be graded on a rubric. So we grade every episode on production, writing, acting, science, because it's a science fiction show. Even though I maintain that the science screwdriver is a magic wand, and it's a fantasy show. And then we also grade it on rewatchability, and so we like basically we like strictly evaluate each episode. And then for Into the Archives, I also do like a strict outline, or not well, it's like more of a structured outline for each episode. I go through and I do an outline for every episode, and then I like share the outline because I have a guest on each episode. Like it's me, and then I have a guest, and so I always, sometimes one guest, sometimes two guests, and then I always share the outline with the guest ahead of time.
So what I'm thinking, you know, along the lines of what you all are sharing, what suggestions do you have for people that might be nervous, you know, or afraid, you know, fearful of just doing the thing? They have the idea, but the idea of putting it out there is scary. And I know we're all coming from, as well, like multiple marginalized identities. So I feel like we can tend to carry a bit of imposter syndrome in a lot of different spaces where we are. But at the same time, we also might be the only person talking about the thing we want to talk about because of our background. So any suggestions for overcoming that, or being able to just push yourself to do the thing?
I have a few thoughts. First off is, as someone who only really wants to listen to podcasts by Black people and other people of color, I think there can never be too many Black people of color podcasting about a thing. Like, I got so excited. There's a like podcast.
You know how many murder mystery podcast, like criminal like investigation podcasts by white ladies that there are out there? Like, there is room for you.
Right. There are so many podcasts by mediocre white people that like, please have the confidence of a mediocre white dude when you're approaching your podcasting. And we have okay, oh no, bro, who said they don't want to be crappy, but I have advice to you. I think people should just assume that the first episode of any podcast is going to be just okay. I can say that about my podcast. The first episode is just okay, and we get progressively better as we're learning what we're doing. And I think that I don't let that be a barrier to stop you, because you can go to a first episode of a bunch of podcasts you listen to and realize it's like, okay, I see you guys are still figuring out what you're doing.
Yeah, I've definitely listened to podcasts that are like more matured, where they have like a disclaimer at the beginning of the first episode being like, this episode is not great. Skip ahead to episode like 20, and this is when the podcast starts getting good. I literally listened to a podcast that said that, I forget which podcast it was, but the person had literally edited the first episode to insert that. The first 2 minutes was just them saying, this episode isn't great, but if you skip ahead to episode 20, the podcast gets good. So
great.
like, the first couple episodes are not great. Although actually I will say that the first episode of Into the Archives features Nicole Hill, and that episode is great. Nicole's awesome. Anyway. But I digress. Yeah, so just do the thing. Have the confidence of a mediocre white man. I have a magnet that says that on my fridge. Swear by it.
And it might help, like, to have a script if you're really nervous about talking on what you're going to say. Just script out a little bit of what to talk about, and you can, like, move on from that. But, like, as long as you have something to say, that's all that matters. You can get better with time.
Mm-hmm.
Also do it with people you like and trust. You're going to be spending a lot of time with them or relying on them for something that is, even if you're doing it for fun, it's still like professional. It's still like transaction is not really the word that I want, but it is still like something that you have to do in a structured way. So you have to make sure you do it with people that you trust to be able to have that relationship. That isn't just like you guys are chatting. It's like, okay, so who's going to do what and when, and who can I rely on to do those things? And then if you're doing it with people you trust, when you get on the podcast and you're talking about whatever, like you know that you're in a safe space, and that makes your content better anyway.
Mm-hmm. And also definitely don't be afraid to ask for help. Like Lucia and I did also, like, when we realized that it was a lot more work than we had bargained for, we brought on a third person to our team to help us with editing, because we realized, like, hey, this is a lot of work. This is more effort than we bargained for. So we brought on a third person to help us out with the editing and everything, just to not always be only the two of us doing things.
So important. Okay, so you hear that, everybody? Do the thing. They said it first. Put it out there. Follow the advice of the magnet.
Oh, also, I realized I didn't say his name. His name's Owen. He's my friend. He's great.
Oh. Oh, look, we got somebody recording tonight. Yay. Funny story. Our first episode that we recorded, I was going to try out something, I don't even remember what it was, something programmer thing I found, or maybe I asked in the Slack and someone suggested it. And trying to download the episode after it was done, I deleted the whole thing and it's forever gone.
Oh, no.
And that is why I am not responsible for recording the episode. But you know, it just goes to show. At least I started somewhere. So
record backups. That's the other thing. Always have more than one person record backups. Like if you do online recordings, like we usually record through Zoom, because Lucia and I are in different places, so we usually try to have both of us recording at once. Although just last night we were recording, and because of a quirk of things, I was the only one recording, and because of a quirk of things, my desktop was updating, so I had to record on my laptop, and my laptop wasn't plugged in, and it died right at the end of recording, and I almost lost everything except for the fact that I luckily plugged my charger in right in time for it to not completely lose power. So we didn't lose the recording, which is good because we were recording Love and Monsters, and I do not want to talk about that episode ever again.
That's definitely valid. A fear. That's definitely a fear that I have, that like you'll have I'm pretty sure it has happened. I just don't remember what it was that it happened with at the moment. It might be the nerds are typing. I don't remember. Something happened, or it could have been something a long time ago. Maybe it was Wizard Team. Because that's always my fear, is that or it will be my fault that some recording did not happen. It's just like, okay, I am constantly checking that I am recording. I have that little window open. I like move it over so I can see it, make sure, because I've definitely had it like stop. And I was like, I haven't been recording for 10 minutes. So, always, just have your little recording situation. You got to have like a side by side, your agenda and your recording thing. So you can double check, because man, have I had stress thinking about like, am I going to lose? Is it my fault? Do I have to re-record that? It was so good. It was so good the first time. And you don't want to have to do it again. It's not as good the second time.
Yeah, especially this. I was going to say, especially because this episode we were recording it with a guest, so it would have been very bad to have to re-record it.
Yeah. So Talia points out it was TNAP. We lost like 15 minutes because of Zencaster. And it was just like, but we were doing so well. Like the intro was like banging. We were like we were back and forth, like bantering and stuff. And it was just like, so that broke. Let's start over.
I was once recording when Sisters with Sabers, and we were interviewing E.K. Johnston, who wrote the Padme trilogy. And after we finished recording, we found out that her entire audio was gone. It didn't work. The whole thing, we were so upset.
Oh, that is so upsetting.
That is crushing.
The whole thing was gone. So, like, thankfully, she agreed to come back the next weekend. We recorded all over again. But, like, I still get upset when I think about that, because I was like, oh, that was so good.
Oh, no.
Oh, man.
And it's like someone you're, like, looking up to, and, like, oh, man.
I'm like, please don't judge us based on this. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I really... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead,
really, Jessie. If you have space on your computer for Audacity, definitely recommend recording on Audacity as a backup audio, if you can. And if you're a witchy crystal kind of person, black tourmaline is what I use on my computer when I am recording, me and Lark both, because we've had too many weird technical difficulty things. And like, or it's like Mercury's in retrograde, and you're like, you know what, let me just put some black tourmaline on my computer while I'm recording, and like hope that is going to clean all the energy. So that is the crystal you want if you feel like it's going to help.
Good to know. Now, so speaking of social media, or not social media, but like engagement, right? So now we make the episode, record the thing, figure out the organization. But how do we get people to listen to it? Like, do you guys use well, some of you I know because I follow you on social media, but you use Instagram, Twitter. How do you manage that? What's kind of any suggestions, best practices for ways to engage people to listen?
So I have an Instagram and a Twitter for both of my podcasts. Into the Archives also has a Facebook that I frequently neglect and sometimes forget exists. Wibbly has a Tumblr that Lucia manages. Wait, is that about the Facebook?
That's just in general. Delia's sharing our system, which is not true.
Okay. I was gonna say I kind of want to throw Facebook into the void.
I mean, maybe we did that for Black Girls Create, so don't do it. Trust your gut.
Yeah. I would, except for the fact that Facebook is actually the medium on which Into the Archives has the most followers, in which case it's kind of bad that I neglect it so much. But anyway, the point is, so the reason that I kind of struggle with promoting the podcast on social media is because it's a bit difficult, and this is the part where you hear that Talia does too many things, which is why my username is Talia is trying too hard. Don't look at me like that, Connie. But so yes, I may or may not manage 6 Instagram accounts. And so I have 6 Instagram accounts and 4 Twitter accounts, and and it's a little bit difficult to manage all of them at once. So I do promote all the podcasts on all the social medias, and from the tracking that I've done, we do tend to get like a decent amount of traffic from the social media, but I feel like we would probably get more if we had someone who was dedicated to doing just the social media that wasn't just me trying to manage 6 Instagram accounts at once. Don't look at me like that, Connie. I like Instagram, okay?
Connie's look speaks for us all, but I have this one account that I started for our podcast in hindsight, and just figuring that out has been, I mean, I don't know, people that do this for a living, my hat is off to you, because trying to make the post, trying to find a little picture, and then you got to find a caption, then you got to put hashtags. It's a whole nother world.
I'm with Delia. I'm like, toss it into the void. Like, I don't even tell people I have podcasts.
Yes, I'm looking at you too, Mel.
I don't do any of that stuff. I am so thankful for Shara on Recap Madness, because like every week she will put out a tweet, she will post on Facebook, she will tell me, and then have an Instagram post. But if it was up to me, no one would know anything. I'm like, do I have a podcast? I don't know. You can't prove it. Yeah, that's my face, but that's not my voice. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I do post like on Instagram and Twitter every time that there's an update, but I do neglect the Facebook, unfortunately. I always do a Twitter, an Instagram story, and then I also share it on my personal Instagram, but not, well, my main Instagram. I don't share it on my other 4 Instagram accounts.
We got a range of strategies here.
I feel like I don't have a strategy as much as a don't be like me, because I manage our Twitter account, and because of IRL burnout, I haven't even done anything in like a month, which is not what you should do. If you're able to be consistent and post most of the week, you should. Don't be like me. But I think just even being on like Instagram and Twitter are kind of like the biggest places to be promoting your podcast. Unfortunately, I think because queer content is often shadow banned on Instagram, I think we're still also under a shadow ban. So even though we post really good content, because my co-host does all of that, it's kind of like, what's going on with our engagement? Why is it just so good? Why can no one who's following us see our stuff? So, I mean, all social medias are just terrible because they're owned by terrible rich people. But at least for the time being, unless you're just going to go like get a bullhorn and drive around and tell me about your podcast, I like don't totally know how else to be good at promoting yourself.
I will say, I don't think it's worth it to pay for ads. So don't do that.
Yeah. So I feel like for Tarbis, it's a Black Girls Create production. Not that Tina isn't, but it's sort of like grew directly out of Wizard Team and were happening kind of at the same time, which now looking back on it, I'm like, how did Bayana and Robin do that? It's wild. Magical mysteries happen every day. So it sort of was like, an easier, like, there's like a funnel of like people coming to BGC stuff. But now that Wizard Team's over and like Tarbis is on hiatus for however long that lasts, and a lot of our other podcasts that we do are on Patreon. So I did almost forget about that. I did host a Lord of the Rings podcast called Token Black Girls, and my main contribution was the title. Hat tip to me. But I think it's sort of, it is hard to keep up with. And I say that as like my literal job in the daytime is social media manager, but people send me stuff and then I post it. I don't have to like do it. And so like things for like the nerds are typing, it's like we have to do it, but it's mostly Delia being brilliant. So I would like to give her props for that because because it's an Enneagram and MBTI podcast, those are popular. That's popular content on Instagram. So that's primarily where we put our efforts, and we, repost memes, or like Delia makes really great like series and content. And I sometimes like help like write the things, but that's really where my brain, that's where I lie. That's where my talents lie. The rest of it's mostly Delia being amazing. But because we knew that that's where the audience that we wanted lives, because that we know that that's where the audience lives, we made Instagram our primary focus. And I think that has helped a lot because we're just like in the hashtags and like posting content that's not just promoting our episode. I think that if you can find a way to post about things that aren't just like, this is the new episode, I think that's helpful because people are, again, like there for you, for who you are, for your personality, for what your podcast is about. And so, anything that's relevant that you can bring to the table, it, fleshes out your account and your presence in people's minds, especially if you're on hiatus for whatever reason. Talia and I currently are kind of on hiatus from social media, even for the Nerds Are Typing. But I think it's sort of like, if you can keep the social media momentum going while you're not recording and not like in season, then, I think you'll have an easier time like keeping up with, or like keeping your listenership more consistent.
I do live on Instagram. I do appreciate all the posts that go on Instagram from you guys, all the podcasts. We had a question in the chat, and Nicole was asking, how do you all feel about cross-promoting with other podcasts?
Definitely a huge help. I know, and this isn't even my podcast, but I go here. But I know that, for instance, like Wizard Team has its like really great following, but then they went on Panelists, and that brought like a wave of people over. I think it is kind of like strategy that you have to do, because I think it's great to go on other people's podcasts, and like that's a really great way to support. Obviously, Wizard Team has gone on the Gaily Prophet and vice versa and stuff like that. But you also, it's about like keeping your network of people that you're friends with and like want to like have community with, and then like try to like reach up a little bit so that you like get out of your same bubble, so that new people, because that's what you want to like find new ways to get new people to listen to your podcast. So whenever you can, like don't say yes to everything, because that's just gonna lead to burnout. But every once in a while, if you're able, try to co-host with someone who's like doing something similar to what you're doing, but not the same thing, or someone who, just like find a way to make a connection work. And I think that's a helpful way to get new people to find out who you are.
Any other thoughts about cross-promoting? I know for us, when we looked, well, actually, we were the only podcast that we could find that was active right now that was Black people talking about like Disney Channel original movies, which was interesting. And then we found one podcast, I think, because they liked the Instagram and they do something similar. But it's interesting just to see, like, we were the only ones that we could find that were doing the exact thing that we were doing from our specific backgrounds. But any other thoughts from any of the rest of the panelists? Oh, well, I have a question too about like, is there an ideal length that you suggest? Because again, we kind of mentioned this earlier. When you're in a podcast and you're with your friends and it's a good time, and you know the conversation can go on and on. And my podcast, we have challenges sometimes figuring out like, should our podcast be this long or maybe it should be shorter? But also, if people want to listen, they'll listen regardless, and like balancing that. But also, then whatever you record, you have to edit and listen to yourself say again, which I know someone also put in the chat like that is also a hard part, just to listen to yourself talk. So, any thoughts on if there's an ideal length or not?
I have mixed thoughts because I think that you have to remember people's attention spans. I know that a lot of people and a lot of like really popular like professional podcasts tend to be shorter, like 30 minutes or whatever. But sometimes they're more like heavily scripted and more heavily like organized, blah, blah, blah. But I think I'm a mixed mind because I'm like, people don't really have the attention span for long things. But then I'm like, okay, but you can just pause it. Like, if the episode goes really long, like you can just pause it and come back later. Like you don't have to listen to the whole episode at once. You can just pause it and come back. So I don't know. I'm of a mixed mind, but I think if you can keep it to approximately an hour, I think it's, you get to say the things you want to say. You probably will go over and then you can cut some stuff, kill your darlings and all that. And it's like easy chunks that people can listen to if they want to pause it, for instance.
Yeah, I was going to say Into the Archives is usually anywhere between 35 minutes to an hour for general release episodes. And then I also do extended releases on my Patreon that are usually anywhere between like an hour to like an hour 20 minutes. And then Wibbly Wobbly doesn't currently have a Patreon, but its episodes usually are between 45 minutes to an hour, a little over an hour. If we did do extended release episodes, depending on how much we decided to add back in, they could probably be at least 2 hours. But that would depend on how much we wanted to add back in. We haven't really done that. I would say that, like, for me, when I'm listening to a podcast, most of the podcasts I listen to are usually about an hour, and I usually don't listen to them all at once. Although I will say, actually, I'm kind of infamous for this in a lot of my circles. I tend to listen to podcasts at 3 speed. Sometimes when I want to relax, I listen to things at 2 speed just to, like, just
to really slow it down.
Just to slow it down.
Talia does too much.
And I will say, just on the editing front, I really love the sound of my own voice. So I enjoy editing because I like
somehow
the sound.
That's rare. I feel like it's surprisingly rare for people who podcast. Like most people that I know who podcast do not like to listen to their own voice, or they're like, I'm not going to podcast because I hate listening to my own voice, or I need someone else to edit this because I do not like listening to my own voice. But there are people who like to listen to their own voice, and I think it's funny that people who are like literally an audio only medium just don't want to listen to themselves. Let's just talk and then you listen to it over there.
Yeah, no, it's like, I know that sounds narcissistic, but what I mean is, like, I like my external voice so much more than my internal voice. Like, listening to myself recorded is so much nicer. Like, I wish I could hear that voice when I talk. It's so, I just really like my external voice.
I feel like when you use like not your computer mic, but an actual microphone, you're like, oh, this doesn't sound terrible. I mean, I can remember I've listened to myself on like cassette tape and I'm like, ooh, no, what is happening? But when I'm recording digitally, I'm like, this is fine. I can listen to this. Oh my God, wait. I had something else for the other question and now I've completely forgotten. I think that maybe I'm a bit of an outlier because I actually love podcasts that are at least an hour or more because I feel like a half an hour podcast, I'm like, well, now I got to get up and like, find another podcast or like keep it going. I really like to hear
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of work.
So I mean, the Gaily Prophet, like I think maybe our shortest episode is like maybe a little over an hour, just because we have so many things to dig into. But for Escape from Reality, they're usually between like 45 minutes and like an hour and a half, just because I think both of us are like, we're interesting enough to have a lot. But I think we would never go over, I think, more than 2 hours because I feel like that seems like you're pushing it for like what people's like attention is going to give to you. It's like 2 hours seems like a good limit.
Yeah, I'm like, keep it under 2 hours. An hour is preferable. That's just a lot to edit.
Yeah,
and no, I
say,
do not like the sound of my voice.
You gotta go back to the editing part. Like,
yeah,
like you can have however long an episode you want, but someone has to edit it, and it's not going to be me. Sorry, Talia.
Because like I do the editing for Nerds of Prey, and that is just a process. That takes me sometimes days because I'm like, oh my God. I really got to listen to this instead of like doing 3 things at the same time. Because like if I try to do anything else while I'm editing, then I found out that I missed like 10 minutes of dialogue, and I'm like, I don't know what happened.
Right.
Yeah, and
it's hard because you can only do that, and I don't thrive when I have to do one thing.
Yeah.
And especially when it's like listening to my own voice. Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, and I will say the other reason that Lucia and I take so long to edit, and it was a little hard, is because for both of my podcasts, we're very dedicated to providing transcripts for everything. So every episode, like from Get, always has a transcript. So when we release the episode, we release a transcript at the same time. So when you're releasing an entire hour-long episode with an entire transcript that also like has everything attached to it, it takes a really long time. So we specifically use the editing software Descript to like help us transcribe our episodes, and that like makes it go a little bit faster. But like it still takes a long time to get it all done, because we like edit alongside including a transcript, which I know a lot of podcasts don't necessarily do, but it's something that we're really dedicated to making sure that all of our podcasts are fully accessible. So we also maintain, in addition to all our social media, I also maintain 2 websites for our podcast. So we do that.
Okay. Well, we are wrapping up here, and this has been such a cool conversation. Like I said, I'm super excited to be able to talk to all of you all, especially because I've been able to listen to your podcast. So I'm just soaking up all the wisdom here. And so as we're wrapping up, I would love for everyone to share, where we can find your podcast, and a little bit about that so that folks know how to find. And then everybody listening, go find them and subscribe and listen. I can share mine. And so my podcast is called In Hindsight. As I mentioned, I started it a couple of months ago with 2 of my best friends. And so we are discussing, we started with Disney Channel original movies. There are a ridiculous amount of them. We are only in 1999, and we are going all the way until I think 2007. So, and then we'll be going into more. I did not
realize they were in order.
We're doing the decom in order, yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we're doing them in order, and then we'll transition into just nostalgic stuff from our childhoods. We were all born in 91, so everything from the 90s, early 2000s, we'll be talking about that. And so you can find us at well, in hindsight is the name, but we have an Instagram that I have been trying to figure out how to manage, and that's in_hindsight_pod. And so that's Instagram. And then we can go back in the same order. Mel, if you want to go, and then Jessie, Connie, Talia.
Okay, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jane_Anon. And my podcasts are all on iTunes, I believe. So that's The Nerds of Prey, Recap Madness, which is just Nerds of Prey is like all pop culture stuff. Like we don't really have a specific topic that we're talking about each other week or each month that we have an episode. Recap Madness is like recapping a TV show. So like last season we did season 2 of Motherland Fort Salem, and we're about to do the latest season of The Expanse. And Sisters with Sabers is a Star Wars podcast. So like all on iTunes.
You can find all of my podcasts on our website, #ruthless.com. Hashtag is spelled out. And then we're on Instagram and Twitter at The Gaily Prophet, which is all one word. And if you, I guess, want more adorable kitten content, you could find my personal Instagram at Live from Detroit, which is also just one word.
We love the kittens. We want all the kitten content.
You can find Tarbis on where you listen to podcasts, Time Relative Blackness in Space. We are on social as Black Girls Create. On Twitter it's BLK Girls Create. The Nerds Are Typing has its own social because like I said, the Enneagram MBTI people are on Instagram. So on Instagram it's The Nerds Are Typing. On Twitter we're Nerds Are Typing, and I'm at Constar24. And you can listen to our Patreon exclusive podcasts on Patreon under Black Girls Create, including Talking Black Girls.
Talia, where can we find your several podcasts?
Okay. You can find so I have a lot of podcasts. You can find my podcasts at the Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey podcast is at wibblywobblytimeyimey.net. Also at WibblyPod on all the socials. And then also Into the Archives, the fanfiction podcast is at intothearchivespod.com. Also all the socials are at archivespod. And then also you can find me, Talia Franks. I'm just Talia_Franks. And on all my socials. And then you can also find me at just TaliaFranks.com. And then also patreon.com/TaliaFranks. And I also just put all those links in the live chat.
Awesome. Hello again. I'm back. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope folks wrote down where to find you. And remember, these panels are recorded. So if you missed that, if you need to go back over it or you want to hear any other part, you can come back to this in future. You'll be able to find all panels Black Girls Create YouTube channel. And this is our final one for 2021 Kuumba Kickback. So cheers all around. Super grateful to everyone that tuned in. If you aren't attending Creator Circle tonight, come hang out at our game night in Discord that begins in just under an hour. And Artist Alley is still open for the rest of the weekend. So if you haven't been able to
spent so much money on Etsy.
I didn't even realize there was an Artist Alley. I got to go to that literally.
Yes, it's a virtual Artist Alley. Go do it. If you haven't spent all the money already, like Connie.
It's gonna look so good. It's gonna look so good on my wall still.
Yeah, listen. It'll be great. You get to support artists of color. And
Yeah, I actually got that picture from last year's Artist Alley.
Go. So go get that stuff. Go put it up. Come to game night. And if you want to support Black Girls Create to put on more programming like this and encourage more fans to create, you can do so by going to blackgirlscreate.org/support. All right. Thanks, everyone.